Good evening and back at it here with the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. Much to get to today as we're on the eve of the playoffs, at least most of the NFL is. Maybe not the Chiefs and the Eagles, but everybody else is. What's the takeaway from the Chiefs win over the Raiders? As much talk as went into the poor showings against the Broncos and Texans. Does the good showing against the Seahawks and Raiders erase all that? Who are these Kansas City Chiefs? Much has been made about the playoff format. Did they get it right, or did the Chiefs get the short end of the stick? Mahomes is headed towards his second MVP. Was this actually his best season as a Kansas City Chiefs? Pass rush, 6 more sacks, 55 on the year, second in the NFL. Do they deserve more credit for their performance? Do you believe in George Karlaftis right now? Do you believe in the kicking game? Oh, I know Marc Boerigter can't wait to sink his teeth into that. Can Kadarius Toney be a wild card for this team in the playoffs? Who are the Chiefs going to see in the divisional round? Is Eric Bieniemy looking at a head coaching job this time around? Not a lot is being said about Eric Bieniemy. We'll see if he gets his shot this time. It's all coming up here on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast.
This is the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Chiefs, breaking down the Chiefs like no one else can. Red, Gold, and Bold is hosted by Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro. Jeff is a senior columnist and on-air personality for the NFL Network and NFL.com. Eric is the senior VP of Research and Development for Sumer Sports. Soren Petro is the host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Red, Gold, and Bold podcast is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Chadiha, Eric Eager, and Soren Petro.
And good evening and welcome. If you're joining us live via the stream, if you're joining us via the podcast, you can join us live via the stream. We do it every Tuesday night, 10 Eastern, 9 p.m. Central is when you can catch the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. With us as always, not so much. Yeah, always Jeff Chadiha, NFL Network, NFL.com. Marc Boerigter in for Eric Eager. Eric Eager on assignment at parts unknown, former Chiefs wide receiver. Marc Boerigter, also co-host of Chiefs Pregame on Sports Radio 810 WHB. My name is Soren Petro here from Sports Radio 810 WHB. And gentlemen, let's get right to it. Jeff, let's start with what is the takeaway from the win against the Raiders? Asked them to play well, finally did play well. What do you take it from that?
Well, first I want to say welcome to Mark. He's already getting people in the comment sections excited about comparisons to him between him and Eric, so that should be fun.
His hair's already better.
Hour. Yeah, exactly. Takeaway, I would say, look, this is the game you've been waiting for. Yeah, you've been calling for a blowout for the last 3 weeks, and it finally showed up. I mean, they were great in all three phases. I looked at it like you wanted to see them have a game like this going into the playoffs. I think when you're beating Denver or Houston barely, it doesn't get people excited. But when you see what they could be when they're clicking on all cylinders against the Raiders team that I thought would show more fight. I think that game really was decided very early on. I think, once you saw Devontae Adams drop that touchdown pass, then the interception, then the failure on the 4th and goal situation from the 2-yard line, it pretty much was game over. And the Chiefs, I think they're kind of an enigma sometimes when it comes to this kind of stuff, because you want to be able to say this is who they really are and dismiss the other stuff. But I like the fact that the defensive line was dominant. I like the fact that the offense was very efficient and that they put a team away.
Yeah, and it's something we have been asking for a long time. Mark, how about it? Mark and I, for those that don't know, do the pregame show along with Curtis Seabolt on Sports Radio 810 WHB. And we've been calling for a long time. As many times as Jeff heard me talk about, lay the beat down. You've heard it just as many times, yes. Just earlier and maybe sleepier when we fire that one out. We finally got a strong performance. What did you think once we finally saw it?
Well, I thought it was a performance they needed to have. And, we talked about this on the pregame show on Saturday. Coming off a lackluster performance against Denver, this was a game you needed to not only win because of the scenario that all happened with last week, to get the number 1 seed, but I felt you had to play well and had to have a good showing as a part of all that. And I felt that they did that. And they weren't necessarily dominant, I would say, over the course of the entire game, but they took care of business. They did what they needed to do. And then looking at it, that's the best they've played, I thought, as a complete game in quite some time. And that includes the Seahawks game, where they were in control of that game for most of the game. So I thought this was an important game for them to play well. I thought they did that. I'm like Jeff. I was surprised the Raiders didn't have a little more fight in them. I know Soren, you and I have talked about this a lot. You can rally against a backup quarterback, only so much. But I thought that the Raiders would have a little bit more fight in them than they did. But at the end of the day, and looking at this game, this was a game that I thought the Chiefs executed the way they needed to, and have some momentum here. If you believe in momentum, at least playing well, feeling good going into this bye week.
Yeah, listen, Jeff, you're right. We have been talking about it for a while, but I do think it's important for the psyche to remember that you can be great. Like, I don't think there's any way you can look at a game against the Texans, survive in overtime and think of anything other than, whew, not like, oh, bring on the Bills, bring on the Bengals. Like, there's no way you can mentally tell yourself that you're ready to go when you survive, and I mean survive, that type of game. I just think there's no way. I think the only chance you have of really, starting to play well is by building some confidence within yourself. And you hit on it, Jeff. It wasn't just that the offense moved the ball up and down the field. The pass rush was there. This really was a complete game, right? It wasn't one side bailing out the other side. They took the football away. That's become a consistent theme. 8 takeaways in the last 5 games. Takeaways, I said, Jeff. Don't let anybody call them turnovers when we're talking about the defense. Takeaways, 8 of them in the last 5 games. But I think there's real reason to believe that, it's not just wishful thinking or homerism to think that they might actually be playing their best football right now.
Yeah, and I think I think it's important to see that when you're playing. I think it's one thing to talk about it or, hey, we're this good or we're the top seed. But, when you watch film, players know. when you hear coaches talk, players know. And end of the day, this team still hasn't beaten Cincinnati this year and hadn't beaten Buffalo this year. And so what they have to rely upon is the belief that they can do that at some point in the postseason. And that requires them playing at a level that they played at on Saturday. And so, yeah, I definitely think it's important to see that. And keep in mind, this has been a great team for the last, whatever it's been, 7 years. Certainly the last, since Mahomes, it's been 4 years. Mahomes has been starting now, right? His 5 years, right? He's 6 years. I can't keep track anymore.
This is a 6th year, 5th year.
5th year as a starter. So he's been 5 years as a starter. Not the same team as it was when he first started. Like, most of these guys who were playing weren't around when they won the first championship. And so you got to take that for granted. You're trying to build, they have a culture here, but to be a championship team, you have to have players who understand what it takes to win championships. And so there's a lot of guys here who've been along for the ride, who've been winning and basking in the glow of what Mahomes and Kelsey and these other guys have built. But for them to win a championship, a lot of these guys we're talking about, the George Karlaftises, the Justin Reeds, the people like that, they got to be playing well too at this time of year. So it was great to see that, and the kicking game too. Can't forget about that.
Yeah. And how about the kicking game? Let's get to it, Mark. I know you and Jeff have had a couple of conversations on my radio station with the Border Patrol, our morning show, and discussed it. Listen, they seem to get it right. Did you like the fundamentals of it? Is it something that they can rinse and repeat the rest of the way through the postseason?
Look, obviously we've had a lot of conversations about this, but I think that one game does not necessarily mean that everything's fixed with it. And it is still a concern for me going into the playoffs because this team has been able to get away with errors, specifically in the kicking game, field goal, extra points, because they played inferior competition. And those are the types of little things that will come back to bite you here in the playoffs. I was encouraged because we've had a week here, finally, after about 3 straight weeks with issues in the kicking game, with the holds, with the kicks, wherever you want to place the blame, that there weren't any issues, in the complete operation of all that. But it's still a concern of mine. And the reason I say it's still a concern of mine is listening to Dave Tobe a week ago sit up there and talk a little bit about this in the press conference. And And this is an organization, as you guys know, that they're never going to throw their players, quote, under the bus or really even criticize them publicly on things. But he didn't really seem to take a lot of ownership to me of going, we need to fix this. His verbiage was, I'm telling all our guys we still have our best football in front of us, which to me was a little concerning that they're not acknowledging necessarily that it's a problem. And the other portion of this in the kicking game is that, Harrison Butker came into this game having back spasms. They signed a kicker in Matthew Wright to, the roster just in case. And he obviously was here earlier in the year. But the health of Harrison Butker is a concern to me right now too. Whether it's his ankle that took him 5 to 6 weeks to get back from, or whether it's, these back spasms. We're all old sitting on here right now. We all know what back spasms feel like, how crippling they can be, let alone looking at a kicker doing this and trying to do that. So I'm still concerned about it, but I was, I guess encouraged that we got through 1 week without actually having to highlight a disappointment in the kicking game for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. How about it though? I mean, Jared Stidham, he looked good against the 49ers, so that had everybody, Jeff, going, well, look, he did it against the Niners, which is a quality defense. Maybe the Niners mailed it in, right? Maybe that, maybe the Niners walked past the Raiders, sleptwalked past the Raiders. They still found a way to get a win. I'm sure in San Francisco, nobody's bragging about that win, but they found a way to get a win the same way the Chiefs did against the Broncos twice and the Texans. I'm not ready. Listen, I'm very pleased that they finally put together a quality win, but I'm not ready to say it's all fixed just yet. I do think the bye week is huge, but I'm not ready to say it's all fixed, but I am ready to say they look a lot more dangerous.
Yeah, they're dangerous because they got a great quarterback, got a great coach. They've won a lot of games. They know what it takes to win at this time of year. All those things haven't changed. And I think sometimes it's hard, I've said this before, that a lot of times when you're watching a team be on a run like this team has been on, where they've been winning division championships and playing in Super Bowls, you think it's always the same team. You feel like college football where, okay, it's Georgia's rolling out there. They're going to go undefeated, or Bama, whoever it is, the sexy team at the moment. And the team changes all the time. And it's always a fluid situation. And so it's very easy to say it's the same jerseys, the same players, going to be the same outcome. When in reality, this team really, if you're really being honest about it, has relied heavily on the quarterback to erase a lot of mistakes. The same things that were issues 8 weeks ago are issues now. You still don't know how Andrew Wiley and Orlando Brown Jr. are going to hold up against premium pass rushers. You don't know if rookie corners are going to be able to handle guys like Stephon Diggs or Jamar Chase. You don't know, as Mark said, the kicking game is going to get it done. And so ultimately what you hope is that when they get into those moments where you have to rely on these things, that it does go their way. If you're a Chiefs fan, you want to believe it's going to go their way, but you don't know that until they're really happening, until you're really in the fire. We know Mahomes is going to do it. We know Kelsey's going to do it. We know Chris Jones is going to do it. But that's what this team has been all year. And again, we go back to growing pains. We go back to learning on the fly. This team has been doing that all year and have managed to win 14 games doing it. But again, when the competition gets tougher, arrow pointing up doesn't matter so much as knowing how to make a play when it counts.
Well, and all of the consternation about, them not beating bad teams by more now is irrelevant. There are no more bad teams. And if you win by 1 point, you advance, Mark, right? Like now style points mean nothing anymore. Now the bracket is set. Not where the bracket's all going to be played, but it's set. I recognize they'll adjust based upon who the low seed is, but everything's locked in, and now it's win in advance. Does that make it easier for a team like the Chiefs because they don't have to try to live up to the expectations of what they should look like? They just have to win a game now.
I don't think it makes it easier, but what's in front of you right now, and it is truly win or go home. And I think that's a portion of this. And to piggyback off of what Jeff was saying, winning these games and winning 14 games, anytime you win masks a lot of your, faults or your warts that you have. And some of this of course, because this is a really good team, we're nitpicking on and looking at things. But I'm glad you brought up the tackles, Jeff, because, we don't know exactly how they're going to play against premier pass rushers overall. There are a lot of still unknowns. And I've said this before about this team, that you just can't flip a switch when it comes into the playoffs and expect to win. And you can't do that in the National Football League regardless, but you can't do that in the playoffs. And sometimes I feel like with this team, they have this little bit of a front runner mentality, like we'll get this fixed, we'll be fine, and all that kind of stuff. That's why I was encouraged last week that they went out and took care of business when they needed to against the Raiders, because after a couple of lackluster performances, obviously they beat Seattle at home, but against the Broncos, against the Texans, they didn't look sharp, and they looked like they were just trying to coast. Weren't trying to, but they were coasting through to get through into this playoff scenario and into the playoffs here. So that's why I like the fact that they took care of business. They're right now in the number 1 overall seed. They've got the bye week this week and coming out and going to be ready to play. And I think, as Jeff mentioned, there's a lot of roster turnover on this team. This is a team that I think a lot of us looked at, hey, might take a step back this year in terms of wins, was still going to be a really good team because you've got Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback. I think right now, more than ever, you lean on Andy Reid's experience and his success in the playoffs. You lean on the leadership of Patrick Mahomes. You lean on the leadership of Chris Jones, and you lean on the leadership of Travis Kelce, the guys that have been there and know what it takes right now to get the job done.
Yeah, and I'll put up what Terry said in the chat room. I mean, I think this is legit. They are 14-3. Well, never really satisfying any of us with the level of play. They're 14-3. That means there's a level for them to go to. The question is, can they get there, right? And we'll find out if they can. You listen to the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast, proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, serving the entire KC metro area. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project with a written warranty. That's right, they all come with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Tell them you heard about it on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Is the playoff format correct, Jeff? I don't think either one of us are going to be real enamored when we break this down. I know I'm not. Are you okay with what they ended up doing with the neutral field with the Chiefs and Bills and secondary? We can talk more about it tomorrow night. The coin flip between the Bills and Bengals. What's your thoughts?
What's the coin flip? I thought that was out.
It is out. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Getting confused. The conversation of what all they were going to.
Okay. Yeah. Look, I mean, I was in the camp of play the game. You play the game, you don't have any problems with this stuff. I still haven't heard a great argument for not playing the game, except for emotional. Like it was hard for the teams to do. And I get that part of it, but just you can't go to this and then not expect to have blowback or not expect to have criticism or whatever people are feeling about it. I thought it was the best they could do. We're sitting here in Kansas City, and I've heard people say, "Oh, Chiefs got screwed." Well, Chiefs got a bye when they went into the second last weekend, not having a bye. Buffalo wins that game, and they win. They beat the Patriots. The Buffalo Bills are number 1. They get the bye, and so right off the bat, okay, the Bills missed that opportunity. The Cincinnati Bengals, obviously, they felt like they had a shot at the bye. And they were concerned about the possibility of losing a home game in the playoffs to a coin flip, as you just mentioned. Didn't happen. But again, I understand their concerns about it. Like, they didn't really get a great deal out of it. I think the Chiefs really benefited. And if the worst case scenario is you have to go someplace outside of Buffalo to play an AFC Championship game or Cincinnati, and a neutral site is the option, I think you did well for yourself. And I think, unfortunately, fans just see it from their view of it. But end of the day, there are a lot of teams involved in this that they were trying to placate. And for me, it's probably the best case scenario. And I've heard a lot of discussion about the possibility of there being neutral sites moving forward for the championship game. I'm not crazy about that. I think you should get some reward for going through a long season and winning you're getting that top bye or getting home field advantage. But the way it is right now, I think that's probably, they tried to please everybody as best they could. I don't know how else you could have done it.
Mark, when it's all said and done, you satisfied with this, that it was the best they could do, or could this have should they have just taken what was a less emotional stance and gone by what their rule book actually says?
Well, I'll say this. Number one, I'm glad DeMar Hamlin's doing better, right? First and foremost in this whole scenario. But I do think that the league panicked last week on Thursday. And when I say that is they already had parameters in place if a game gets canceled of to what they go to in regards to that situation. Now, this was a unique situation because of the medical emergency that happened on the field. But where I think the NFL faulted on this whole piece is that they let the Buffalo Bills leave town on Monday night. And I do firmly believe that this would have been a different story had this happened, or I shouldn't say a different story, a different situation in terms of playing this game, had this game happen on noon on a Sunday. But at the end of the day, when you're trying to please everybody, you're not going to please anybody on this whole thing. And so from a Chiefs standpoint, I understand that Chiefs fans are upset. Season ticket holders are upset potentially, right, on terms of still having to purchase tickets to an AFC Championship game, but having it be here in Kansas City. But at the end of the day, the Chiefs fans should not, and those that follow Chiefs Kingdom shouldn't be worried about where the AFC Championship game is played. Yeah. If, as Jeff said, if the worst case scenario for you is you have to go to a different stadium to play this in a neutral site, then so be it. Both these teams, and the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs, have to get to the AFC Championship game first. I think that's kind of the expectation and what everybody's kind of leaning to, that these are two of the best teams, obviously, in the National Football League, and that could happen. But I don't think it's necessarily anything right now that we should be completely upset about. It is what it is. I thought the league should have just reverted back to what their original rules and ramifications are in these types of situations and go back to winning percentage. But the Chiefs got the best deal out of this entire scenario for sure, because they did go into last week only having to win against the Raiders to get the number one seed. Yeah. And to me right now, it's not about where the AFC Championship game is played. It's about having that bye week and getting that extra week of rest. I think Chiefs fans also need to look at this way, that you've hosted 4 straight AFC Championship games here over the last 4 years. 2 of those years, things happened for you to be able to host those AFC Championship games here in terms of where your seeding was, or things that happened the last week of the season to put yourself in a position from an organizational standpoint to host the AFC Championship game. So I think right now Chiefs fans should enjoy the run, take care of business here, whoever they play over the next couple of weeks, and we'll see, where it all falls.
And listen, we're not going to play the game, so I don't think Terry's talking to us. The fact that we're discussing the AFC Championship game before they've, made their way there is not going to, unless you're superstitious, is not going to be a problem. He says, Terry in the chat room says, let them play the game first. And I get that, but ain't any of us. Well, Mark did strap it up, but we ain't strapping it up now. Not even Mark. But I think there's something to be said, for this comment from Matt. He said, can we pause and let it soak in that the rebuilding/transition year for KC is the number 1 seed and 14 wins in a year that Vegas had 10.5 for the over/under on this football team. I mean, it's and again, still no one's satisfied with how they're playing, right? Yet they've exceeded these expectations. That is, for the rebuild part, I think all of us on this podcast were more confident that they would handle the Tyreek Hill, moving on without Tyreek Hill, but a lot of people weren't convinced of it. And I do think there's something to be savored for that, but now it's time to win. And if you want to be great things need to be accomplished. And, I don't think Patrick Mahomes shying away from the challenge. And if you win a neutral site conference championship game, might as well be the first team ever to win a neutral site conference championship game, right? Patrick Mahomes is probably thinking, well, there's something Brady's never done. So, I'll put that, next to me. I mean, if you want to be great things have to be accomplished. Patrick Mahomes has been great this year, probably going to win another MVP, Jeff. Is this his best season?
I think it's his best season just because he's had to play a different style of football. He's had to do it without a stud receiver. I think this team has relied more on him to pull them through. than in any previous year he's played. I mean, again, I don't think this team is anywhere near as good as it was 2 years ago. And that's just because of the experience of the guys playing at the talent level. I mean, you lose guys who were Pro Bowl caliber players or guys who were veterans, and you're replacing them with rookies and guys who don't have as much experience. It's not going to be as good of a team. And so, to the point of them being 14-3, and there's multiple games you can look at and say, if he's not on the field or playing at a ridiculously high level, they ain't winning the game. And so that was the case in a couple of those Denver games. It was the case against the Titans. It was probably the case. What was the other game in there? I'm thinking of early on, the Chargers game earlier on in the season. And so, I think that there are numerous. I mean, forget about the stats. I mean, at this juncture in NFL history, everybody's going to throw for about 4,700 to 5,000 yards. You're going to have a lot of that going on. A lot of guys are going to be around 35, 40 touchdown passes. I think that he's the MVP because he was asked to do as much, if not more, for his team throughout the course of the year, and he did that, and they benefited from it ultimately because of his play.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You said everybody is going to throw for 4,500, 35 to 40, 4,500 plus was four guys: Kirk Cousins, Tom Brady, Justin Herbert, and Patrick Mahomes. Now, to your point, there's two more at the 4,400 mark: Joe Burrow, Jared Goff. I think sub 4,000 is tiddlywinks, right? Like, you better be throwing for 4,000 now for sure. I still think 40 is 40 though, man. Like, 40 touchdowns has still not been done that often. And I think that's the thing, that even with the shovel passes and those that, I'm sure there's some old school quarterbacks cringing at the fact that Patrick Mahomes and quarterbacks today get credit for a touchdown pass on what's a glorified forward handoff. But Mark, how about it? Is this his finest hour, even if statistically it's one of his best, but not his best season?
I think it is. And to echo a lot of Jeff's points, putting his team on his back this year when they needed him most. And we heard Steve Spagnuolo a week ago acknowledge in close games that what's the difference? It's Patrick Mahomes. And when your defensive coordinator of your own team says that, that's saying a lot. But I also think this, like, when you look back at, and I don't necessarily, Travis Kelce is classified as a tight end, but I look at him as he's obviously been the number one threat in this offense. He's the go-to guy. So you can put him in the receiver category if you want to. But from the guys that are actually classified as wide receivers, the only returner that really had any kind of experience was Mecole Hardman. And Mecole Hardman only played in 8 games this year. So, yes, Brett Veach and Andy Reid went out and made some moves to bring in Juju Smith-Schuster, to bring in Marquez Valdes-Scantling, to bring in Justin Watson, to draft Sky Moore, to make a trade mid-season before the trade deadline for Kadarius Toney. But what he's done with a completely rebuilt receiving core to throw for over 5,000 yards and 44 touchdowns, or 44 touchdowns on stuff, like, I don't know how he can't be the MVP based on what he means to this team.
Yeah, and I think it is his best year. I'll agree because, we can look at it now and everybody's like, well, Juju's good. Remember, he had that 1,400-yard season, but Juju was damaged goods that nobody wanted. He didn't sign a 1-year, $3.5 million deal full of incentives because it was just a lock that he was going to have a big season. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, frankly, is disappointed in Kansas City, and we found out very quickly why Green Bay, with no receivers, was willing to let him walk. He still served a role. He played a purpose. He's a veteran. He made some catches. He missed some other catches. He takes the top off the defense. Cole Hardman went down. And I think the biggest part why it's his best season is, Jeff, you've talked a lot about the people you've discussed with about, maybe not willing to take the check down. He not only did he take the check down, he made Jerick McKinnon a record setter, right? Touchdowns in each of the last 5 games, 8 receiving touchdowns in the last 5 games, tied the NFL record for receiving touchdowns by a running back in the Super Bowl era with 9. I mean, that to me is what did it. Yes, he still had the security blanket of Travis Kelce, but he had to be a different quarterback, and he was. And not everybody can do that, right? He wasn't just airing it out. There were a couple of games where he had the lowest, the next gen stats, the Zebra Technology next gen stats, was pointing out that he had the lowest air distance, lowest average of target distance of anybody in the NFL that week. I mean, that's a guy that, played a different style and did it to a statistical mountaintop, led the league in receiving yards, most yards offensively ever in a single season when you combine his rushing and his receiving, breaking Drew Brees' mark. Just the 15th quarterback to throw for 5,000 yards, yet it's only one of 3 seasons, the other 2 by Drew Brees, where there wasn't a 1,000-yard receiver in that mix. And he did have a 1,000-yard tight end, which Drew Brees did once. Drew Brees actually did it without even having a 1,000-yard tight end. Jimmy Graham one year, but one year he did it, 5,000 yards, no 1,000-yard receivers, which is amazing to think. But Patrick Mahomes had that kind of season. So he's played Brett Favre ball. He's played Drew Brees ball. He's played, whatever it's taken to get the win. And I think that's why you'd have to say it's his best season.
Yeah. And really, this is the kind of quarterback he has to be for the rest of his career, because we all know as you get older, your ability to move around and do those things becomes a lot harder to do on your body. You become slower. That's just, father time working as well. But the guys like the Tom Brady's, the Aaron Rodgers, the Peyton Mannings, the people of that caliber, the Drew Breeses, the guys who play that long, they play that way because they play the way Mahomes played this year. They understand, hey, I got to have my playmakers make plays. I have to distribute the football. I have to see things faster. I have to process quicker. I have to trust the offense. And this was the year where he played more within the offense. And I think even on TV broadcast, you've heard him talk about when Tyreek was here, how much he really, I don't want to say he got greedy, but I think he felt like, hey, he and Travis can do it for me. Push comes to shove, whatever the play called, I can look over there, run around buy enough time and make it happen. And I think without that opportunity being there, he had to look to guys like I'm really impressed by what he's done with guys like Justin Watson, with guys like Noah Gray, with guys like Jody Fortson. Kadarius Toney came in here, and Mark talked about it too. Just it started back in the summer, in the spring, when he was bringing these guys in and saying, "This is how we're going to play football. It's what we got to do." And he was the one who set the standard right from the start. And so what we're seeing now is the byproduct of all the work he put forth, not just during the season, but before the year ever started.
Yeah. Mark, I mean, what's next for him? What does he improve next?
That's a good question because he's so good.
If he's Michael Jordan, I'd say it's his 3-pointers, but I mean, he's already got that in his arsenal.
I think it's still continuing for him. And Jeff used this term greed, and I've said this a lot about Patrick Mahomes. One of his best characteristics as a quarterback is he's greedy. It's also one of his weaknesses that he's too greedy from time to time. And I think if anything that he needs to improve on is continuing to be patient, because he is not a patient quarterback. And I understand that. You want that aggressiveness out of your quarterback. You want him to score on every single possession. You want that desire to be there. It's, can you take the check down? Can you hit the open guy instead of trying to be greedy in certain situations? And can you be patient enough? A lot was made a year ago about the 2 deep coverage and the umbrella type coverages taking things away. That was just wearing on Patrick Mahomes' patience is all that was. There were guys open under him, and I think this year he's gone back to playing within the confines of the offense. And I said this before the year started too. They need to get out of some of their RPO games, because if you put an RPO in place, he's going to take the pass option regardless of what their run option is.
It's not an RPO.
Yes, it's a PO. It's not even an RPO. It's a pass option for it. Yeah. So I think for him to continue to improve, and I think this has been a nice quote reset year, if you want to look at it this way, having a career year for him to understand exactly what it takes in year 5 as a starter in the National Football League to continue to progress. And I like that I love the fact that this year he had that kind of reset year and that realization to continue to be better, and he's having an MVP year because of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And taking the running back plays, the one chatter that I've seen in here, a number of people have mentioned, is kind of being off on some of the deep balls to MVS, Mark. I mean, how much of that is, we know that like him and Kelsey are just kind of on the same wavelength and they look at the field and they kind of see the open space in the zone, and Mahomes knows to throw it there, and Kelsey knows to bend the route whichever way it needs to go. And we know he does that because Andy Reid got super evasive when asked about that on the Jalen Ramsey, when Kelsey beat Jalen Ramsey, and he was asked point blank, is that the route? Which I don't know, the squiggly route. I've yet to hear what that's called on the route tree. Is that a 7, Jeff? Is that a 4? Like what is this route on the tree? But where he curves in and out on Jalen Ramsey and makes it go. Like, obviously that's them riffing, for lack of a better term. And MVS don't riff so good, right? Like, I mean, that's
I don't think it's so much that MVS doesn't riff so well on things. I think it's one of those situations that there's a lot of freedom in this offense, right? There are structures to the route tree, obviously, like any offense. But Andy Reid has said this. He wants those guys in his terms, which he's quoted as saying, let their personality show out there. And Patrick Mahomes and Kelsey have been together now for basically 6 years, because his first year here not starting, but they've been together for that long. And when you come in from the outside, we hear this a lot when you start talking about quarterbacks and receivers being on the same page in the National Football League. Sometimes that's overblown in terms of the structure of the offense. With this offense, it's not overblown because there is a lot of, it's not complete freelance, but it's, hey, run to space and get open in certain situations. I don't necessarily look at the MVS situation as they haven't been on the same page with some of these deep balls. MVS has had a lot of opportunities to go catch the football. And right now his catch radius, to me, is he's not aggressive enough to go get the ball.
Right.
Because he's had several 50-50 balls. And again, they're a 50-50 ball. But there's been opportunities to extend his arms to go catch the football, and he hasn't done it in contested environments. So if he does those, let's say on 8 to 10 other catches this year, we may be talking about a different situation of him not being a disappointment this year in terms of production, as opposed to here's a guy that's not only taking the top off the coverage, but actually making some big plays.
Jeff, you're a DB. I mean, Marquez catching everything here is a dream for you, right? Like, he's not stretching out. He's not creating a separation from you. You get a chance to get your hands in there. You put your hand on the shoulder. You can whack everything away. I mean, I think there are a lot of balls. And I think it's also part of the reason why he never gets a call for PI. Valdez-Scantling I'm talking about. Because they're all body catches. And the ref's like, well, that should have got there because your arm should have been out there. And they get there early because he's waiting for the ball to travel all the way to his chest. I think he just kind of almost fakes out to his own detriment some of the officials. I mean, it would be nice to see him grow. I don't want to turn this into an MVS breakdown, but Eric and I were really big. To get back to our early predictions, we were both really big on the signing, and I still think he's been a useful player. He just hasn't been what I think Eric and I had hoped he would be.
I think Mark used the right term, catch radius. I just think when I watch Mahomes throw to him, he looks like a quarterback who's like, I got to put the ball right on this guy. Like, I don't know if he can adjust. You know what I'm saying? So it's almost like when you think that way as a quarterback, I think you either you're more inclined to overthrow it or underthrow it because you're trying to be perfect with the football. When he threw the ball to Tyreek Hill, and someone made a comment enough about Tyreek Hill, he didn't worry about being perfect. Just put it out in the vicinity, and he was going to go find it, and he was going to jump over somebody to go get it. And I think that's not MVS's game, and it's not a detriment. I mean, he's just not that kind of receiver. I think Mark made a really good point too, in that this offense, the way it's run, sometimes these guys are running routes and they don't know when the ball's coming their direction. And that happened. Mahomes made that comment about the Justin Watson play against the Raiders. He wasn't the first read on that route, but he was like, oh, I saw a chance to take a shot and I took it. And so it worked out for Justin Watson. But again, I think MVS is probably more the kind of guy that you have to design to play for him. You're going to be the number one guy. We're setting it up for you to get deep, and it's coming to you. When it's not that kind of setup, he's not going to be a viable target for you. And he's not, I think Andy oversold him coming in as a guy who could do a lot more with his route running, and they wanted him to be that guy. Not the first time Andy Reid has oversold a receiver who's coming here or a running back he signed. But I think what MVS is here, the same thing he was in Green Bay, is just that the ball's coming more his way and it's showing more of what his weaknesses are.
You've got any kind of parking lot problems, you won't. It's called Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Gann Asphalt and Concrete can handle any problem with a parking lot, from building the whole thing to just some simple repairs. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. You can find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338, serving the entire Kansas City metro area since 1994. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com. I want to highlight what Rhett said, because I think this is a pretty good one. He's asking the question, one of the guys here in the chat room, but it's a good question for all of us. Do you trust this defense to stop Cincinnati or Buffalo late in the game if they have all 4 downs? I sure don't, Rhett says. But we have seen a team that's, produced 55 sacks, second most in the NFL, 8 turnovers in the last 5 games. George Karlaftis has had a complimentary pass rushers. He's had 5.5 sacks in the last 7 games to go along with Chris Jones' yet again dominant performance. Is everybody in the chat room, is all of Kansas City, is maybe the NFL not giving enough credit to how good this pass rush is and what it can do for this team as far as advancing in the playoffs?
Look, it's better without question. I mean, number 2 in the league in sacks. It's crazy that the Eagles have 70 sacks this year. That's an astonishing number. But, yeah, I think that they deserve credit for being better. I think Chris Jones, I vote for the one-on-one awards here, and I voted him for the AFC Defensive Player of the Year because, to me, he's been the best defensive player in this conference. You look at his numbers and his impact. I think he's made a lot of players on that defensive line better. The problem with the pass rush is that when you look at Buffalo, you look at Cincinnati, to repeat a thing that's been coming up throughout this this conversation, 1 sack in 2 games against those 2 teams, against those 2 quarterbacks. That's where it shows up. So look, I'm a Michigan fan. I love seeing Michigan beating up on Hawaii and Colorado State and all the other teams that showed up at the start of the season when it was 51-3. When they saw TCU, it wasn't as much fun. If they played Georgia, wouldn't have been as much fun. And so that's how I look at it. When you're putting those numbers up against those teams, when you are harassing those kind of quarterbacks, it's a different story. And so that's who they have to beat. And I'll put Justin Herbert in that conversation as well, or even Trevor Lawrence if he shows up. I mean, when you're talking about big mobile quarterbacks who can throw, who have weapons, that is the kryptonite to what Steve Spagnuolo wants to do. And so their pass rush has got to be about 4 guys getting home. Can't be about pressures. Can't be about putting corners on islands and all this other stuff. You have to be able to have Chris Jones, George Karlaftis, Frank Clark if he's healthy. Those guys have to be able to play at a higher level in the playoffs for me to believe this defense can get it done against them.
Yeah, how about it, Mark? Where do you sit? How much has George Karlaftis upped your confidence in this pass rush? And is it more Karlaftis, or is it, as a couple of people have asserted here in the chat room, is it the DBs that are giving them more time to get there? And in reality, it's the growth of the youth in the back end and the coverage and getting Trent McDuffie back and up to speed. He maybe didn't have his best game last week, but is that more an indicator of how this defense has progressed? More time for the pass rush to get there?
Well, I think number 1, sacks and coverage go hand in hand. You can make your secondary look really, really good by getting to the quarterback, and your secondary can make your defensive line look better than what they are in terms of coverage and allowing time for your D-line and your pass rush to get there. My concern about this pass rush, I like where George Karlaftis is right now. You don't see a guy, even in the first round draft where he was. It's an anomaly for them to come in and have double-digit sacks in their first year, first of all. And I think he's steadily improved throughout the course of the year. It's an adjustment for an edge rusher to come in here and play against Pro Bowl tackles and NFL tackles that are experienced to learn. I like where his progression is. And I think the biggest thing, and I've always said this, defense is about attitude and effort. And there's one thing that guy has is his motor never stops. And so he's going to get there. That's also where my concern comes in with this pass rush. It's great that they've got, 55, 56 sacks on the year and where they stand in the overall standings on sacks. But if you're not getting to the quarterback quick enough, it doesn't matter. And my biggest concern about this pass rush is in the big-time games, as Jeff said, against the big-time quarterbacks, they have not been able to get any kind of pressure at all. And it's not necessarily against inferior competition, but it's against inferior quarterbacks who are going to get the ball out quickly. and in a timely manner. And that's where they need to step up as we get into the playoffs here. It's about having a consistent motor, because I still see too many times on the edge, on the other side, where there's like one pass rush move and then they're shutting it down on that side of things. That's where George Karlaftis brings a little bit of spark to this team. And Chris Jones is Chris Jones, as we all know. He's an all-pro, and I agree with Jeff. He's the AFC Defensive Player of the Year by far on things. But they have got to be better overall in the big-time situations.
Jeff, you've been critical in the past, really over the last couple of years, of them not getting after the quarterback, not winning up at the front with the big people on the defense. They're doing that now. And they're also doing it by being the 6th or 7th best rush defense in the NFL, which I think is noteworthy, because it's one thing if you go, okay, well, we're not stopping the pass and we're not getting after the quarterback enough, so we're just going to send everybody, which at times it kind of looked like that was going on. To Jeff's point, often against the Bills, like definitely at the end of that Bills game, it looked like they weren't getting there unless they brought 11 at times with Josh Allen. But they did it while not just forsaking the run. They gave up 107 yards a game on the run. I remember the Tampa game, and Tampa didn't even give the run a try. That's 1 out of 17. These numbers don't lie after 17 games. Not only did they get to the quarterback, they also stopped the run. So Michael Dana Love here in the chat room, 2 sacks against the Raiders. He's been a nice rotational piece for this football team. I mean, overall, no. Is it the best unit in football? No. But the best unit in football, I don't know who it'd be. Doesn't have Patrick Mahomes under quarterback. So they don't have to be the best. They just have to be good enough. And I think it does need to be noted that they didn't sacrifice all the run defense to try to get after the quarterback.
Well, I think one, I don't want to minimize them defensively. I mean, they're playing better, but the run. Who was the last good running back they faced aside from Josh Jacobs?
Well, you don't get to remove the NFL's rushing leader.
Yeah,
and just take
he's
that
the
off
only
the board.
guy. Yeah, Joe Mixon. They saw 2 good running backs in the second half of this season. Who's playing running back for the Denver Broncos? I mean, Houston's running back was out. I mean, it's a great stat to throw out there. I'm just not going to sit there and say, "Oh, this team is you can't run against this team." It's just, I think for me,
who's the great runner left in the game today?
Well, that's a bigger point. Yeah, I mean, they're still
okay. So they're being judged against their peers. They were 7th best.
Yeah, I think they were pretty good against the run last year too, weren't they? They weren't bad against them. Anyway, I don't want to get off point. The point I was going to make is that they're better defensively. They still have flaws. And having Mahomes isn't enough to save them anymore. Basically because they're not a quick strike offense anymore. They're an offense that can do that occasionally, but they're driving the field. And when you drive the field, you've got a mediocre defense. You're not getting as many possessions. And so when they play bad teams, they're probably getting 11 to 12 possessions a game. When they're playing the Bills and the Bengals, they're probably getting 8. And if they turn the ball over, they're getting 7. And so you really have to look at that kind of math and that kind of formula as what's important to remember. They don't need to, in 2018, 2019, defense could be just average and they were great. They got to be above average now to help out what they have on offense. That to me is, and the kicking game too. They're losing points in the kicking game. And so you can't be lousy in the kicking game, be average on defense, and be great on offense and win the championship. You got to be above board in all 3 areas.
I think you make a good point that Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, their games have risen. It's a tougher sled. It's a tougher road to hoe now to get there because of the level of play that the quarterbacks are playing at now in the AFC. I grant you that. However, they figured to only play one of those guys, right? That's it. They're only going to have to play
all
one.
It takes is one.
Well, that's true, but they don't have to. But they had to go through Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
In 2019.
And Bill O'Brien.
Ask Houston if they'd like Bill O'Brien back today.
Hey, here's the thing about that game.
He was problems.
You know how they got back in that game, though? They took the ball away in that game.
Yeah.
That's the one thing we haven't really – I know you touched on this earlier, but the one thing for this defense, ultimately, we can talk about the pass rush, we can talk about the coverage, we can talk about stopping the run. They've been better over the last couple of weeks at taking the ball away. That's going to be the key for them here moving forward.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that has to continue, right? They're going to have to play. Listen, there's probably going to be a game they don't get any takeaways. That needs to be the day that Patrick Mahomes is white hot, and then there's going to be a day that they're not quite as good on offense. That needs to be the day they take it away, right? Like somebody's you have to pick each other up along the way. Kadarius Toney, Mark, what do you think of him as a receiver right now? I made the joke the other day. He's been a tremendous running back for the Chiefs. Most of what he does is all catching the ball within a few feet of where it's snapped. Now maybe he's progressing as a route runner and they're going to unleash that. And somebody's going to be sitting on the bubble screen and something, and boom, there's the go route. And he's off on a Tyreek Hill deep route. But how much of a weapon could he be the wild card for this team? What do you see? You played the position. What do you see in Kadarius Toney right now?
What I see with him is an extremely sudden football player. And when I say sudden, he operates really, really well in tight spaces because of his explosion. And the ability I think he obviously has a lot of speed, but I think his greatest ability is in double cut type of routes, double move types of routes. So it could be that simple little whip route, jerk routes, Soren, which is, just to explain to you, is kind of that little, squiggly line you were talking about earlier on things, except, it happens within about 7 yards of the line of scrimmage. The sluggo, the slant and go, the double moves, within tight spaces to get him open. Obviously, he can take the top off the coverage. But again, I think this was a signing that is another toy for Andy Reid, for Patrick Mahomes. And it's been good since he's been here because, they lost Mecole Hardman for half the season. We know he's back and activated on the roster now, was inactive this previous week. He's kind of taken over that role. And, you joking about him being a running back, that's the type of role within this offense I think he can have right now. I don't necessarily think we need to look at anything further for him in his role throughout the playoffs here, he's not a decoy, but there's so much motion. There's that jet sweep look that happens all the times that moves linebackers and moves defensive backs out of position. I think he's settling into what he needs to be for this offense right now.
Jeff, not to burst the bubble of all the people in New England that are lobbying for Julian Edelman in the Hall of Fame, but literally anybody can run a drag route 3 yards across the line of scrimmage. Even if just Kadarius Toney's doing that, while Mecole Hardman's doing this, MVS is doing that, Travis Kelce's circling over to his spot. I mean, you can really see how if they, we had the point, it's going to be a lot of fun to try to see all four of their top four wideouts get out there and line up. They really do with Kelce and Juju working the intermediate stuff, a couple of guys that can run the go routes, somebody else on the drag or looping around back for a potential handoff or a shovel pass. But you can see where if they can get all the pieces, and we keep talking about they're 14-3, and when are they going to unleash the fury? One spot where they really have never had anyone, one, because they didn't start the season with Kadarius Toney. But what they could do if Mecole Hardman is actually back, this would be the first time you would see all those weapons, would be in the postseason. It would be new on film. And Kadarius Toney, with all the threats going deep, he puts one of those Dante Hall, as I saw one of the comparisons to it, jukes. He also looked a little DeMarcus Robinson because the second juke wasn't necessary. The first one was good enough to get him going upfield. The second one, he juked again right into the guy. But he is electric, there's no doubt. I mean, could this whole combination with him, make it all come together to where the offense takes another step in the postseason?
Yeah, I mean, it could. I agree with Mark. I see a player who has tremendous talent, tremendous upside, but he's not doing a whole lot beyond the line of scrimmage. He's getting the ball. A lot of touches come behind the line of scrimmage. And so, yeah, I think he does fill a void there that Mecole Hardman would be doing and what Tyreek Hill did before. I love him with the ball in his hands because he is, even with the fumble punt, Dave Tope talked about that being a touchdown if he could have held onto the football and made another move. I don't know if that's. I just want to see how you guys react to that.
I know he said it, but no. Yeah.
So for me, it's a great toy, but keeping it real, it's great to have toys. It's even better to block people. And so you can have all the things you want to do in the pass game, but if you're hitting your quarterback, guess what? They go away real fast. And so to me, the most important thing this team has to do in the playoffs is block people because they're going to see really good defenses. If it's the Chargers or the Jaguars in the second round, I mean, those teams have good pass rushes now. I mean, they've got guys who can get after the quarterback. Certainly, the Chargers with Bosa coming back and Mac together are going to be a haul. So when you have that, you have to keep people in, and that some of that stuff goes away personnel-wise with guys like Kadarius Toney. And I just feel like most of this offense, for this team to win and really be dangerous offensively, Travis Kelce's got to catch a lot of balls. Juju Smith-Schuster's got to catch a lot of balls, and Jarrett McKinnon's got to be a player. Everybody after that is gravy.
But I think the other after that, and I think those players help set each other up. I guess that's what I'm getting at is when you have every level, Mark, that's covered there. I agree. I think Jeff brought up a really good point. They got to block some people. And we can get excited about sending 5 guys out into the pattern unless 3 guys are going to kill you on the pass rush. Then that becomes a real problem because 8 guys will flood the field and make it a lot harder. But if you can attack at all those levels, we know McKinnon's there with the screens and where he's working. Kadarius Toney, I agree, is not going to morph into Jerry Rice in one half a season in the Chiefs organization. I think he'll get better as a receiver, but there's probably some similar flaws to Marquez Valdez-Scantling and the route running and stuff like that. It's why they're keeping him in the shorter area. But Mecole Hardman's a better route runner than I think people realize. Mecole Hardman has caught the ball down the field. He gets on the field. Maybe it's not Kadarius Toney, but I think all those things make everything else around it better, right? And if you want to slow the rush, throw short, right? Or throw short, then pump short, and force the defensive line to put his hands up, and Orlando Brown and everybody else gets a chance to recenter on the block, and you get a little bit better. If you can keep them off tempo-wise, and that's what hopefully all the weapons do if you're Andy Reid, right?
Yeah, it's the sum of all those parts is what it really comes down to. And, a guy we haven't talked about is Noah Gray also, right? Another tight end having a great year this year for him, who was a 3rd or 4th round draft pick of this team. It's being multiple and multiple from different formations, different motions, different looks, running similar combinations of routes out of different looks, and keeping defenses off balance. And obviously, we all know Travis Kelce is going to be the focal point of the passing game, and so does everybody else in the National Football League. So you do have to kind of pick those spots, but you have to be able to have those other guys step up in those situations, as Jeff mentioned earlier, where you don't necessarily think the ball is coming to you, or you're not even necessarily in the read, or you don't think you're in the read, but you've got to be prepared for it. And I think, again, all those shifts and motions and everything else, and, the spinning huddle was all just last week was all just stuff to put on film and run a wrinkle of a play that they've ran before with different personnel. And the Chiefs over the last couple of weeks have played a little bit more with their 3 tight end personnel, 13 personnel as well, with one running back and 3 tight ends in there. They've put some stuff on tape over the last couple of weeks, even though they struggle against the Broncos on things that they're certainly going to use here in the playoffs.
Jeff, who do they play when it's all said and done? Who do you expect them to be hosting in that divisional round?
Chargers. Yeah, I mean.
So chalk across the board for you.
I think so. I think those are the 4 best teams: Chiefs, Bills, Bengals, Chargers. And the Jaguars are interesting, but I have a feeling that, that first game they played, Bosa got hurt, Sean Slater got hurt. That was the first game after Justin Herbert had that rib injury against the Chiefs, so he wasn't 100%. I think the Chargers at full strength are a pretty dangerous team, have been full strength all year. I think it says a lot about their ability to weather the storm with all these players being injured, and now they're getting healthy. I think the postseason is a second opportunity for them to make amends for a year they thought could have been a lot better than what it was. And so I think they get the win in Jacksonville, and it might not even be close, to be honest with you.
Matt asked, wouldn't Jacksonville be chalked? Jacksonville would be playing to seed, but the Chargers are actually favored in the game. So no, the chalk would be the Chargers. Jacksonville has the better seed, but the Chargers are favored. Mark, who do you see the Chiefs playing?
I'm going to stick with my pick this morning is the Jags. I'm going with the Jaguars. I just think, and the reason I say that is
the Chargers going to Charger?
Yes, and I also think this, and to Jeff's point, yes, the Chargers do have a lot of guys that have come back after injury, right? But Mike Williams is banged up again. Bosa's, you never know what's going to happen with him injury-wise. And then Brandon Staley, say what you want about him being a head coach, but there's been a lot of inconsistencies there over the last couple of years. And I look at the Jaguars winning 4 or 5 straight here, having to play a game in the last week of the season to get in. Doug Peterson has completely flipped the script there in Jacksonville in terms of the attitude, and he's a Super Bowl winning coach with that type of experience and leadership. Yes, there's a lot of guys there in Jacksonville that haven't been there yet, but I'm going to go with the momentum that they have going. And I'm not a huge believer necessarily in momentum, but when you get teams that have won 4 or 5 straight to get in the playoffs and are kind of sneaking in, yes, they won their division, yes, they're hosting the game, but those are the ones you got to watch out for, at least in the first round here of the playoffs.
Jeff, let's close with this. Eric Bieniemy's name is not really getting much talk at all. We're hearing a lot of names in a lot of places, but not Eric Bieniemy's. Are you surprised by this, and are we going to hear it?
I'm not surprised. It's been, I think, a couple of things have happened that have hurt him. Obviously, his name has been out there for the last 4 years, so that's a factor in this. So a lot of teams that even are looking for coaches he may have interviewed with, they already talked to him, so there's not going to be this immediacy to get him in again. And then, too, there's so many good young coaches out there now who've had big years and have put have had a lot of their assistants get a lot of recognition that it's a tough year to look for a job when you got, Nick Sirianni's got both coordinators are hot names, Jonathan Gannon, Shane Steichen. You've got Ben Johnson, offensive coordinator with the Lions, who's on the rise. DeMeco Ryans with the 49ers, defensive coordinator. You've got tons of people out there. Mike Kafka is getting interviewed because the Giants are in the playoffs. And Daniel Jones had a great year, which is not a surprise to me. So you got 5 jobs out there, and you probably got 10 candidates, young guys who are hot names. It's a tough year to be looking for a job.
Mark, you shocked? You see any? Still, you think he's going to get his chance one day?
I don't know. For him, I really hope that opportunity comes. But when you sit here and look at the news over the last couple of days, as Jeff just rolled through all those candidates, not once over the last couple of days, or even toward the end of this year, did you hear Eric Bieniemy's name? Not once. And over the last couple of years, he's interviewed probably at half of the league at this point, based on all the job openings that have come. And, whether he's interviewed well, whether there's other issues there, whatever that may be, whether he was too picky potentially in a situation on looking at things, I certainly don't see it happening in this cycle by any means, just based on the fact that his name's not out there. And it has nothing to do with the Chiefs being in the playoffs right now because he can't interview during a bye week. But his name's not even being floated out there. And it also might be in a situation at this point where he's telling teams too that I'm not interested based on having interviewed as many times over the last couple of cycles. So, but right now, if I look at it, I certainly don't see him getting one this year, and we'll look to next year, but I don't know if it's going to happen now at this point.
All right, we'll find out if any interviews do come about. We'll find out who the Chiefs are going to play. We do the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. Remember, if you're catching us via the podcast, we stream it live Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. Central. Our sister podcast, our NFL podcast, coming your way tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Central. We will break down the entire NFL playoffs. So for Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, Eric Eager out. We still tip the cap to our man, Eric Eager. Marc Boerigter. Thank you, Mark, for filling in. Great job, Mark, as always.
I'm sorry, guys. I didn't bring in much math tonight to the.
No, we didn't miss it. Didn't miss it at all.
Marc Boerigter, former Chiefs wide receiver. My name is Soren Petro. Telling you, one, hit that like button, hit that love button, hit the subscribe button. It don't cost you nothing, but it helps us out immensely. And, of course, if you got any questions about a parking lot, call our great sponsor, Gann Asphalt and Concrete. They have you covered, full service paving and parking and paving maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com. That'll do it for us here on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast.